thanks for joining Notepad. We're coming back from the Tanjung Piai by-election. There's a lot of politics that are currently taking place. But what we want to do is to shift the focus to the corporate sector yet again, because very recently the United Nations actually hosted the SDG Summit, or the Sustainable Development Goals Summit in Kuala Lumpur. In that event, we were talking about corporate sustainability, corporate's role in ensuring sustainability, as well as what can businesses, particularly the SME sector, do to actually reinvigorate their business by making sure that their business is sustainable. And during that conversation at the UN SDG, I moderated a panel where we spoke largely at length about the kind of business uptake that can be enjoyed if corporates actually took up the SDG agenda. And joining me is one of my panelists then, Shankar. He is the Director of Export Promotion and Market Access Division of Matrade. Jai, again, thanks very much for spending time with me. As I mentioned, over the weekend I was shouting and I lost my voice, but it's still an important thing to talk about.
Right.
Let's talk about the SDG roles that can be embraced by the corporates, and why should the corporate sector particularly inculcate the agenda of SDG into their business?
Well, thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you for having me here. I think the basic challenge is for the corporates to sort of realize and accept that investment into SDG, any sort of funding that goes into SDG conformity, would have to be seen from a investment perspective rather than a cost perspective. Today, I think if you're talking to a typical SME, for him is that why the business need? Where is the business case here? And this is what we are trying to sort of have a conversation with the companies, exporters, and we're basically telling them that, you know what, the investment could eventually translate into profits and clients. Yeah, the two common denominators today that a lot of Malaysian companies go about at the marketplace is about price and quality. Unfortunately, these have sort of become a common denominator, and we need more than just price and quality to compete effectively. And if we continue at just these two variables, then moving up the value chain would also become a major challenge for our companies and the economy as a whole. Today, there's a lot of conversation that's coming out of the marketplace where they're trying to articulate elements such as sustainable growth. They're looking at elements that is relatable to socio-economy, environment, and so on. All the elements that has been so eloquently articulated in the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets. So this is something that's happening at the marketplace. Now, as you know, Matrade is the National Trade Promotion Organization, and what we do is essentially we promote exports and we promote cross-border investment. But we don't do this at a vacuum. What happens is that we have 46 offices worldwide, and there's always an information loop. These 46 offices are conduit for us to get information at what's happening globally. And the messaging is quite clear, right? I think basically, the information that we're getting is that a lot of the consumers today have a sense of what is needed for them to protect their community, and they're actually expecting the business owners to respond to this need. In the past, a lot of these sort of response used to come from the NGOs. Today, the consumers themselves have started articulating it. And in the era of social media, the engagement is very intimate. The possibility of the consumer sort of talking to the business owner, it's very close today. So if we're going to see more and more of this, it's not a mega trend yet, but we on the ground, not here yet, yes, yeah, but globally it's happening, and we can see it's going to accelerate. Right? So what we're telling our companies, our exporters, is basically get ready and be quick about it, and more critically, I think, start positioning yourself correctly so that you're able to sort of leverage on it.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is that there is a profitability angle if companies champion or start to align their business goals towards SDG agenda as well. The biggest thing that I want to focus right now is on how do you ensure that companies, while they are so, particularly SMEs, right, they are so concerned about cash flow. That's the number one concern, on top of growing their business, new market entries and stuff like that. How do you ensure that by them trying to position themselves in a more globalized, marketplace, this is not going to eat up on their profits, they're not going to take up their cost? How do you ensure that businesses can do their business and yet still be sustainable?
Okay, so and this is a transformation of mindset, yeah? It's the other way around. You got to flip it, and they basically got to say, you know what, there's an opportunity for us to sort of leverage on this and create a market disruption strategy accordingly, yeah? From a country perspective, I think, and from an industry perspective, they can actually go into thought leadership. They can start looking at areas where Malaysia can sort of have a thought leadership on this. We can look into innovation elements where we can actually transform these so-called challenges into business opportunities. If you look at all the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, every one of it are problem statements. Now, how do you then transfer and transform the problem statements into solutions? And we are in the business of solution making. Yeah? The industry can respond and come up with solutions. So a whole bunch of stuff can happen. That's from the revenue perspective. From a business model perspective, then you sort of have to sort of remake your relationship with your stakeholders, with your shareholders, with your supply chain guys. And you then have to sort of leverage on this to make sure that the conversation that you're having with all these stakeholders within your ecosystem is something that's productive and something that is in line with the SDGs. So there are a lot of opportunities out there, and eventually, again, it's not a cost. It's an investment imperative. And that's how I think the conversation and the mindset will have to be so that you can sort of move forward. There was a 2017 report, I think, Better Business, Better World report by the BSDC, which is the Business and Sustainable Development Commission.
Okay.
Now, this commission is basically private sector guys who came together, including the likes of Jack Ma. Yeah? So they want to look at what are the business opportunities that can come out of sustainable development. And one of the findings was a remarkable finding. This is a report very specific to the Asian context. They estimate $5 trillion potential business coming out of businesses that revolves around sustainable development models, and about 230 million jobs in Asia by 2030. So obviously the potential opportunities are big, and this is what our companies will have to look at. 4 sectors were sort of identified.
Okay.
I think they were looking at food and agri-produce. They were looking at city and urban development. They were looking at health and well-being, and they were looking at energy. But it's not restrained or limited to these 4, obviously. So it's all across. These are the 4 that that particular commission looked at.
Oh, okay.
But we can play to our strength. But ultimately, I think the conversation with the businesses would be this is not an altruism sort of approach. There is a business case to be done. You can actually take leadership, and if you do it right at this point of time, there's a lot of money to be made.
Jai, there's a lot of SME owners that I speak to, a lot. I mean, I'm talking more than like 200 here. They are predominantly trying to grow their business. Some of them don't know how to. So they have the aspiration to grow their business. They want to export, but they don't know the difference between a vision and a mission. They don't know between corporate objectives. They don't know these lingo, right? And they want to transform their companies, but they don't have the, firepower to hire the graduates. At the end of the day, they're going to be stuck in that kind of business that their parents left them with, for instance. Do you think that it's time for the government to actually help them grow in terms of changing the transformation process or thinking process?
Obviously, it's sounding yes. The government has a role to play. Now, if you look at a lot of the development plans currently in place, you have the RMK 12, Rancangan Malaysia 12, it's a 5-year plan. You have the new Industrial Master Plan by MITI and so on and so forth. A lot of vertical sectoral plans are also in place. One thing they have a lot of it in common is basically they have a sustainable element embedded within a lot of these development plans. So the government obviously sees the importance of it, though they are development plans, the end game usually it has to come to an export element anyway. And Malaysia is a trading nation; it has to sort of translate itself into an export component, a trade component, and so the government is putting all the right elements in place. The framework is there. And even other more broader plans, if you look at, for example, our Honorable Prime Minister, he launched the Shared Prosperity Vision 2030 document. And what's that about? That's about inclusiveness, that's about reducing inequalities, and that's all completely aligned with the SDGs. Broadly speaking, the government has put in a lot of effort, and is putting a lot of effort because we sort of realize that there's a lot of opportunities, and that's the way to go. If you look at the UN context, UNCTAD, the UN Conference for Trade and Development, they sort of identified 3 SDGs that can have an impact on international trade. You have SDG 10, SDG 11, SDG 12. SDG 10, I think it's about inequalities, reducing inequalities between nations, within nations and between nations. 11 is basically about communities, about urban development, about cities, doing a sustainable city. And then 12 is about basically climate change and its impact.
Greta Thunberg kind of argument.
Yeah, so all these are in place. Now, how then it cascades down to the SMEs, and that's the big challenge, yeah? Matrade on its part, for example, has also sort of initiated something called Sustainability Action Values Exporters Initiative, SAFE. Now, this is a big initiative for Matrade, two-pronged. One, to make sure Matrade in itself as an organization is ready, aware, our teams, internal teams. Matrade is a very complicated organization, it's a huge organization. So we need to have a capacity as well. So that has been done. It's an ongoing process. It's being done in a very thorough and intensive way. But second part of it, I think, is a lot more interesting. We are building capacity for the exporters. Late last year, for example, late last month, we had something called the National Exporters Development Conference, whole-year conference, and the theme was sustainability and inclusiveness. We had more than 1,000 ready exporters, companies which came, and that was all about. A lot of the discussions were sort of flowing around the question about sustainability, because you hit it right on the head. A lot of people talk about it, but there's very little understanding of it. And I can tell you, for example, a lot of people tend to sort of equate it with CSR and stuff like that.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that very shortly. But
so there's a lot broader perspective to the whole thing. So the conversation, that's what we are looking at. And in fact, if tomorrow, if I may, tomorrow we have the following program from SAFE. It's called SURE, Sustainability Readiness for Exporters program, which is a half-day conference. We have about 8 speakers. It's at Matrade. We're expecting about 500 over companies. I think those who are interested to sort of understand the nuts and bolts about how do you embrace and how do you sort of bring about sustainability and sort of embed that into your business case, that'll be an excellent platform for us to for us to do that sharing element. So maybe they should come tomorrow. But
where is that?
It's at Matrade. It's at Matrade at our Matrade hall. It starts at 9 o'clock. In the morning, and that's a start, right? So Matrade, it's serious on its side. We've started a couple of different programs, and all across, we have offices all across Malaysia as well. This will be an ongoing process, because we have to sort of educate, but the caveat here is it should not be left alone to the government to sort of just take the lead.
No, everybody has to jump in.
The onus is also on the private sector to sort of educate themselves and find ways to sort of take this to the next front.
Okay, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Jai Shankar of Matrade. Thanks for staying on with us. We're currently speaking with Jai Shankar, Director of Matrade, about the UN SDG and how that relates to SMEs. Jai, you prepared this particular graph that I want to highlight. If you look at this particular graph, it shows the disproportion in terms of export contributions between MNCs versus SMEs. Between large and mid-tier companies, they 4/5 of the contributions of export comes from these kind of companies, and less than 1/5 comes from SMEs. This is, on one side, this is bad because it shows that the SMEs aren't exporting enough But on the other side of the coin, this presents a great opportunity for SMEs to jump on the export bandwagon and try to tap the international market. And of all the things that you presented in our panel conversation about 2-3 weeks ago, this graph stood out for me because there's a lot of opportunities for companies to try and see how the market is like for them to position themselves. One of them, and based on our fellow panelist, the CEO of HSBC Amana, was talking about if you are an exporter and if you are sustainable in the way you do things, this presents a great user case for the MNCs and the kind of contractors that can hire you. So you become a very attractive vendor for these MNCs, a kind of attractive feeder company, I guess. Is there more to this in terms of how companies can actually see this as an investment imperative, as you say just now?
Yes, there is. There's two parts to it. One, within your business process, yeah? So what you're going to do is you're going to start conforming to SDGs, sustainable practices, and so on. And that's reflected, and that's reflected in your storytelling. See, doing this whole process is just one half of the struggle. The second half is more critical, which is the storytelling. The conversation, the communication channel that you have with your potential buyers and importers, that is important because they need to know that you're doing it. So there's one part of it.
You're serious about doing it, it's not lip service?
Yes, it's not. Yeah, so you got to you got to basically assure them this is happening and they have to trust you. So there's a level of honesty that will come about if you have the kind of transparent processes. So that's one part of it. That means within your processes. The second part of it is, I think, a lot more exciting, is the innovation part of it. Now, it's a green field. And you're right, SMEs do not export enough at this point of time. All the more reason they got to look at this particular trend and say, guys, you know, we can actually go in and make a statement out there. The biggest challenge we have is that out there we don't have a story to tell. A lot of the SMEs struggle, they get crowded out by the MNCs. So they go out there, now they have a unique selling proposition, they can talk about sustainability, how they're conforming into it. And interestingly enough, then they can sort of also ask a request for a slightly premium on their products. And from a brand positioning perspective as well, now you're moving away from the crowd and you're putting yourself in a space that is less crowded. Yeah, so all these are opportunities. But for you to take this step, there's a level of, I think, buy-in from the senior management, from the board members, from the shareholders, whole spectrum of things. And they all have to accept that, you know what, this is a possibility for us to turn around the company, remake its business model, and make a dent at the global marketplace. So currently, SMEs, I think, are contributing about 18.6% of the exports. We can easily escalate this number if we get this right. So it's a huge opportunity, and that's how our SMEs should rightfully look at it.
Because this is the only way I can see how we can grow that export pie. MNCs are already exporting to its capacity right now. There's nothing much more that they can do. We need that push forward. That four pillars that you discussed earlier from the BSDC report, energy, citizen urban development, food and agriculture, as well as health and living or well-being. Each and every sector of these are quite unique for us to actually capitalize. For instance, the way I see it is food and agriculture. Maybe we can also leverage on halal. Health and well-being, we can also leverage on our intensity or capacity for R&D and development or manufacturing of drugs, which Malaysia is indeed trying to push forward even further. Do you see that these niche sectors you guys have been doing this a lot and for a long time, it's still not being picked up the way we want it to see? For instance, halal growth is there, but it's not, you know, exploding. What's holding this back?
It's good that you pointed out what the halal part of it. In fact, I think that's a lot of opportunity for us because of halal. See, halal conformity has allowed a lot of our SMEs in the food and beverage sector, which constitutes a huge chunk of our SMEs. They're used to this sort of certification and conformity. I think it was Minister Mujahid who was mentioning about just during the SDG summit itself, how he could sort of mirror the Islamic values and proposition to SDG goals, right? It's not too far of a movement. So the fact that a lot of the Malaysian companies already have that framework and the comfort level of addressing conformity to halal certification would allow them to make the jump, or rather the jump won't be too difficult when they go into sustainable practices and so on. And there's an opportunity, because then the cost element or the investment element is not too big. Yeah, so there's an opportunity there, obviously. And we're mentioning about cities and urban development and so on. Malaysia has a lot of services that is around, that can be built around smart cities. That's a mega trend, smart cities. Yeah, and Malaysia, if you look at the services sector, that's another challenge that we have. How do you grow the contribution of services sector to the GDP and to the export total exports? So this is again a huge value proposition for our service companies to go into this space and actually innovate and come up with solutions that matter, that incorporates the needs of SDGs, as well as the business needs and so on. So not only from a halal perspective, there are opportunities there, but there's also opportunities in the services sector. So these are all, again, problem statements, so to speak, if you see it in that perspective. And we are all solution makers, so we're out there and there's a lot of opportunities to be made.
Plenty. We'll take one more break. When we come back, we'll discuss how CSR isn't quite sustainable practices as well. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying on with us. Again, we're with Shankar of Matrade. Jai, remember we spoke about this very briefly earlier on in the episode, how CSR does not equal to sustainable practices. It's just one of the activities within the ambit of sustainability. In fact, this was one of the bigger things that was discussed during the SDG summit. But that's the paradigm of how people are right now. If I do CSR, if I just clean up a beach one day in a year, if I help out an orphanage, during Raya or something like that, I'm done. Right. I'm a sustainable business. Right. How do we get businesses that have this thinking or this paradigm to shift their worldview to something else? How do we get that done?
That's a big challenge. I think one way to do it is that you sort of encourage the sustainability reporting, which is currently sort of confined to more of the listed boys. Try to cascade that down to more the SMEs, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, so once you start getting them to sort of look at it, and then they will understand that sustainability reporting is a lot more than CSR. And then we'll say, look, it is a lot more holistic. It's end to end. And that conversation will then sort of revolve around, say, okay, why do I need to do this? And for that to happen also, I think the other elements such as training and awareness and a whole bunch of things has to start. See, when the journey towards sustainability is taken, it has to be taken by the CEO and the decision makers right at the beginning stage. And they have to sort of tie these up with a strategic intent, right? You can't take it in isolation. So a CEO of a company will first have to say that, look, you know what, this is how my company is going to be in 5 years' time. Once he has established that strategic roadmap, only then he works backwards and look at sustainability and sort of incorporates the whole business element. The moment he realizes that in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, sustainability will be a major impetus for decision making, he has to incorporate that. Yeah, so let's
do it now.
Let's do it now, right? Yeah. So the strategic roadmap has to start first. And after which, I don't think so, then they will look at CSR in that context anymore. CSR is a component of it. Yeah. It's about engaging with your community. Yeah. But sustainability adherence is a lot more than that. It's actually a business case. Right, so once they understand it's a business case, then it flows together with a lot of other different elements apart from CSR. It's also about data, it's also about traceability of information, and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah. We don't have much time left, but I just want to touch a little bit on the aspect of consumers. And being in Matrade, I'm pretty sure that you have been on various trade missions in and around the world. What is the flavor like from consumers in demanding products and services from sustainable companies? Is the demand there? And if it's not, maybe we should do more? Well, what's the story from the consumer aspect?
There are two parts of it. One, there is demand. If you go to a developed economy, there is always this awareness about what needs to be done. We've had in the past got a bit of bad press in some of the sectors that we have gone into because a lack of understanding from the consumer's perspective. We try to sort of educate, and that's where the storytelling comes. The storytelling is a big chunk of sustainability. You have to be able to go and tell your story in a right way, because a lot of misinformation can come on board, and this sort of clouds the whole conversation.
Yeah, but palm oil in Europe is like.
Yeah, that's an ongoing saga.
Yeah.
But it cuts across a lot of other verticals as well.
And no, having said that, when we talk about, say, for instance, the palm oil sector, we're not really talking about the SMEs.
We're not.
We're talking about the 3 or 4 or 5 companies. And I'm sure they have the resources and ability to think how they need to shape that industry. Yeah. The rest, there's so life is so much bigger than
the rest is where the interesting part comes. So one, they're aware of it. 2, they might not be aware, but it's our job then to go and create the awareness because it's brand proposition.
Yes.
For example, right? If you're doing procurement in the right sense of it, if your supply chain is sustainable, you're engaging with farmers and you have data traceability and you know what you're doing, you must be able to go and articulate to the consumer there. So maybe at that point of time, they're not even looking at it, but now you've sort of educated them and say, you know what, my brand, these are my values of my brand, and that includes the fact that I take care of my community, I take care of my environment, I take care of my people, and a whole bunch of other things. And you sort of create that demand as well. So while there is a level of demand that's from the consumers, from developed economies, but you can do this across the world. You don't have to just wait for the developed consumers from the developed economies to sort of create the demand for you. You can actually go to a developing economy and do the storytelling and create the demand. And that's where the excitement comes.
I know for a fact Matrade is thinking a lot about Africa these days. Yes, I've had your colleague here on this show talking about some of the interesting markets there, including Central African countries where growth rate is astronomical. Nigeria, for instance, is just growing. It's going to be, I don't know, second, third biggest country in terms of population in the near term. What's the story there? Do you think the consumers there care what is sustainable, what isn't? And if the companies in Malaysia do this and try to export in developing markets like Africa, for instance, do you think that works?
Well, I think it would work if you frame it correctly. I just came back from Nigeria, and in Ghana we had an oil and gas mission about 3-4 months back, and there was a lot of interest with Malaysian products and services. But the narrative for us has always been, how do you compete with the bigger boys? Yeah? Even in the oil and gas sector, you have the MNCs out there, right? So how do you sort of change the goalposts, if you may, and make them understand that you're giving more than just a product and service? Yeah, your engagement, your sustainable practices, and so on can make a difference not only for yourself but also for the local partners. In Nigeria, in the oil and gas sector, for example, you have what you call a local content. So you have to basically work with local companies.
Just like here, lah.
Yeah. So you have to work with local partners. What do they have? When they go out there and they try to compete, now they have something else to talk about.
Of course.
Above and beyond just products and quality.
But they have to build the capacity internally.
They have to build, So that engagement, and that is the thought leadership we were talking about. Now, if Malaysia is able to step into that vacuum at this point of time, a relative vacuum, and we're able to sort of champion this in a very intense way, we then have the space for us to build a brand.
Because
so
we can be a first mover.
You can be the first mover, right? So you start talking about that, and you sort of shift the whole conversation from just being quality and what I can do and so on.
Yeah.
Though that is still relevant, but that's given, right? I mean, you don't have quality, you can't export. It's given, right? So we expect that to be anyway. But what can you do above and beyond? And that's sort of tied to the other element, which is brand building. We've always struggled with brand building. So what does your brand say? Now your brand can now sort of ride on the fact that it's sustainable and so on and so forth. So it can make a dent. In fact, it's a lot more exciting in these developing markets, because then you're opening up something, a completely new vista that most people have not even gone into.
You shared plenty in terms of actually all this
Yeah.
talks about the ingredients of building a good brand
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my conversation with Shankar of Matrade. Again, thanks very much for spending time
Thank
with
you,
me.
Brian. Thank you very
Apologize
much.
for
Yeah.
the voice because I was shouting at the football game for my son over the weekend. But if you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad there. You can watch these interviews or these kind of interviews on your mobile devices. Just download the Astro AWANI app. And reminder that tomorrow there's the event at Matrade,
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
I guess if they want to find out more, matrade.com, something
Yes,
like that?
yes. They can go to matrade.com and they can go to our Facebook site as well. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've quit Facebook. It's not a good place to go. Okay. Thanks very much. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good.
Good.